Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the tragic loss of Air India 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt, Germany. Good morning to you, Richard.
And it's a lovely morning here, and I hope it's a good afternoon in Perth.
It is a much better afternoon. It's a lovely afternoon. Today's episode is going to focus on the Enhanced Airborne Flight Recorder, the EAFR. Both EAFRs were transported to Ahmedabad to AIIB's facility at New Delhi on the 24th of June 2025. That's 12 days after the tragic crash. Download cables required to download the data from the EAFR were sourced from the NTSB in the United States. The items arrived on the 23rd of June 2025. The download from the forward EAFR was attempted on the 24th of June. The CPM was retrieved from the EAFR and found to be in good condition. The CPM was mounted on the Golden chassis and the raw data was downloaded from the EAFR. The aft EAFR was substantially damaged and could not be downloaded through the conventional means. The CPM was opened to inspect the memory card. The damage was extensive. Richard, can you give us an overview of the EAFR?
Sure. So the EAFR comprises a flight data recorder and a cockpit voice recorder combined in one unit. And the Air India Flight 171 Boeing 787-8 aircraft used the GE model of an EAFR, the 3254F. And we're showing a picture of the 3245F, and I will include that in the description below. The FDR data covers the crash flight fully, as well as 5 previous flights, a total of 49 hours of data and around 1,450 parameters are recorded. The CVR data covers the crash flight in full. There are 4 channels of audio, the captain, the first officer, then there's an area mic in the cockpit, and there's also a mic for the observer if there was one present in the cockpit. And all the radio transmissions and the cockpit oral warnings and any sounds in the cockpit will be on that audio track.
So what data is recorded on the FDR, Richard?
Well, quite a long list. And the FDR offers high resolution data on the key aircraft parameters. So airspeed, altitude, heading, the thrust settings, the flight control positions, on the engines, on the actual position of the flight controls, so the elevator and the rudder, the spoilers and the trim settings. It gives you information about the autopilot and the flight director modes. It gives you the inertial navigation and GPS positions and accelerations in 3 dimensions. It tells you all about the electrics and the hydraulics and the avionics and the environmental controls. It gives you all the alerts and the faults and the annunciations on the ICAS display. It gives you all the maintenance and fault reporting that goes on. And typically, these high priority signals are captured 4 to 8 times every second. And then there are mid-priority items which are done once or twice a second, and low-priority items which are done sort of every 4 to 8 seconds. And there are also some event-driven parameters like VHF radio tune status or the APU inlet door, open or closed. and those are only logged when they change, so they only capture the event.
Mm. So, can you give us an overview then of the 1450 parameters that are recorded in the EAFR?
Yeah, so there are around 250 parameters on the flight controls and the aircraft configuration, flap settings, and whether the landing gear is extended or raised. About 350 on the engines, that's for
Mm.
both engines, and 150 on navigation and position data. 125 on autopilot and flight director, then 75 on alerts and ICAS, 175 on electrical, hydraulics and pneumatics, 75 on the environmental system and the cabin systems, 75 on the performance and flight phase flags, they're called. So is it in on the ground? Is it in climb? Is it in cruise? And so on. And then 175 on the CVR and on maintenance data. And that all comes to about 1,450 parameters.
Extraordinary. I don't think a medical science would be able to get 1450 parameters on us, would they?
Well, some of them try, but yeah, nowhere near. I think
But
my latest blood test was about 50 parameters.
so before we go any further, Richard, just a note to the viewers. Please subscribe to us. We really appreciate your support. So just a call out, subscribe to this channel for some really in-depth and accurate analysis of on aviation. And talking of analysis on aviation, Richard, perhaps you can run through what types of data are recorded.
Yeah, so category one aircraft configuration and flight controls. So it records the position of each flight control surface, elevator, aileron, rudder, deflection, left, right, the spoilers 1 to 8, the horizontal stabilizer trim. It records the flap and slat settings, the actual position in degrees, but also the position of the levers in the cockpit and any asymmetry that's detected. The trim systems, the rudder trim, elevator trim, aileron trim, landing gear position for the nose, left and right gear, and it again records the position of the lever in the cockpit and the actual gear, whether it's on the ground or in the air, whether it's extended or retracted. It records the brake pressure, brake temperature. It records the yoke and the pedal positions in the cockpit. So absolutely everything. Same again for the engines, the rotation speeds, N1 and N2, the exhaust gas temperature, the fuel flow rate, oil pressure, temperature, and quantity, engine vibrations, ignition status, bleed valve positions, and it goes on. Navigation and position. So it gives you three-dimensional data, magnetic and true heading, latitude, longitude from a GPS system, the barometric altitude, the calibrated airspeed, the temperature sensors, the QNH, the static pressure, the pitch rate, the roll rate, the yaw rate from the gyros, the vertical speed. It gives you all the autopilot and flight director modes. So is it in a roll mode, speed, Mach hold, altitude hold, LNAV, VNAV, toga, or flight change? You get the full status from the autopilot and from the auto throttle, any flight mode annunciators and whether systems are active or armed, whether speed has been selected or altitude or heading or vertical speed, throttle limits, the whole 9 yards. Any warning messages, all the data from the electrical system, the hydraulic system, the environmental system, the performance system, even the maintenance messages that are put out.
That's extraordinary, the amount of data. I mean, there's no way in the world you couldn't then work out what's happened in an accident virtually straight away.
Yeah, so you put all of that together with the cockpit voice recording. So you know what the pilots are saying to each other or to the ATC and what noises are audible in the cockpit. And you can build up a really accurate picture of what's going on.
It's amazing. So what is the primary avionics data bus on the 7878?
Well, the main one is the ARINC 664 Part 7, the so-called AFDX data bus. And then that is fed to this EAFR. And internally, it then converts the data it needs for recording to the ARINC 717 specification.
Right. So what is the timestamp resolution and the precision on this, Richard?
So the ARINC 717 flight data includes a UTC timestamp recorded once per second using a binary coded decimal BCD time word. And that's located in the data bus in each subframe 0. And you get a timestamp every second, so in every so-called super frame. This timestamp has a resolution of 1 second, and it has a precision plus or minus zero point 0.5 seconds due to the rounding or truncation. And it is synchronized to GPS time. And this aircraft has a GPS system, and that is used normally as the time source for the internal timing. But if for some reason GPS is not available, the aircraft has its own internal real-time clock. So that can wander a little bit over several hours from GPS time, but it won't wander very much. And the FTR records a GPS time synchronization flag. And if that flag is set to synchronized, then we know in the FDR that all the timestamps are then accurate according to GPS time. And, there won't be much degradation in the accuracy of the timestamps.
So what is the maximum sampling rate on this, Richard?
So the ARINC 717 structures in the flight data stream use 64 subframes per second. So each subframe is 15.625 milliseconds. So the maximum supported sampling rate is 64 hertz, or 64 recordings each second. And this rate applies to the critical dynamic parameters, such as flight control surface positions and accelerations and attitude data and altitude data. Parameters are sampled, those parameters are sampled at 64 hertz. In other words, in every subframe, you'll find the key parameters. And they're not time-stamped in each subframe, but you can get an index of which subframe you're looking at, and that implicitly gives you a time alignment to 15.625 milliseconds. And that's correlated then to the UTC time word every second, and you can determine to a very high degree of precision all of these high frequency parameters.
So what about the recordings at the low rate status parameters?
Yeah, so things like switch positions, and we've talked about the fuel switch positions, or we've talked about the RAT deployment status. Those are recorded once a second. So the FDR data doesn't need the word about or approx. It would be useful just to say they're recorded once a second and they're accurate to plus or minus zero point 0.5 seconds.
Mm.
The sampling rate is compliant with the ICAO Annex 6 and Appendix 8, and it's sufficient for capturing critical events in the aircraft's flight. There is, for example, the signal RAT deployment, but there's also a monitoring of the AC voltage and frequency. And there's also a monitoring of the hydraulic pressure coming online. So from these other parameters, you'd be able to see not only when the RAT was deployed, but when did it get online hydraulic pressure, and when did it come online with a stable electrical supply. And there is an option in the EAFR, and we're not certain whether Air India took up this option, to monitor the AC voltage and frequency parameters 64 times a second. And you can then work out exactly what's going on with the electrical supply. But even without that option, they're monitored every 250 milliseconds at the worst case, and probably 125 milliseconds at the best case. So a lot of data there.
Sure is. It's amazing. So are the Air India Boeing 787s EAFRs compliant with the mandatory standards?
Yes, they are. The standard is called ED-112A, and India's Boeing 787 fleet is, based on the current public and regulatory information we have, is compliant. But as I mentioned, we're not sure whether this option on the power quality measurements was taken up. But nevertheless, it's compliant with the survivability and data retention standards, and it may not be fully compliant with the power quality sampling recommendations. But the FDR architecture used on the Boeing 787-8 really is excellent. As I say, time aligned and regulation compliant, and actually gives you far more data than you need to fulfill the regulations. The time precision is dependent on the GPS synchronization. The sampling rates are adequate, and we just can state it does meet all the ICAO and FAA requirements.
Mm. Yeah, look, an extraordinary capability there to record every single thing the aeroplane does. I mean, it'll miss nothing at all, really,
No.
particularly combined with the CVR. And as we know, both were successfully downloaded. All that data's there. So there's absolutely no excuse not to give us some more data
Yeah. So,
than they.
the pilots can't even sneeze without it being recorded,
Yeah,
and the systems can't even have a software glitch without it being
yeah,
noticed. So,
yeah.
nothing's going to get missed.
No, indeed, you're absolutely right. So, Rich, that's a great piece of work, a lot of detail there, and thank you very much indeed for putting all that together. Um, Viewers, that's all we've got time for today. We're going to take a day off tomorrow, and I really mean it this time. And we'll be back on Sunday to take your questions on this episode and the previous episodes. So once again, Richard, thank you again for your work on this.
You're welcome.
And viewers, please subscribe to us, please like us, and please do keep those wonderful comments coming. We really do appreciate them very much. And keep the questions coming. They're absolutely fantastic. And we do appreciate them very much indeed. And do tune in on Sunday. Thank you.